The Pentagon never sleeps, and neither did he. Third shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cleaning the offices where America's biggest secrets were discussed. 20 years of emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and being completely invisible. Until one night, when a Russian phrase slipped from his lips, and suddenly everyone realized they'd been walking past a ghost from the Cold War. Welcome to Everyday Legends. Before we continue this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today, and if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel, because sometimes the biggest secrets hide in the most ordinary places. Joseph Joe Volkov was 63 years old and worked the night shift cleaning the Pentagon. Every night at 11 p.m. he'd arrive, put on his gray coveralls, grab his cleaning cart, and begin working silently through the corridors of America's most classified building. Nobody gave him a second look. Nobody made conversation. He was just Joe the janitor. But Joe's story was as classified as the Pentagon itself. In 1962, when Joe was just 22, he'd been recruited by the CIA. A Russian-American citizen, Joe spoke perfect Russian and understood Soviet culture from the inside. During the height of the Cold War, these skills made him invaluable. For the next 25 years, Joe operated under the codename John Walker throughout the Eastern Bloc. Moscow diplomat, Prague businessman, Berlin journalist, each time a different identity, a different story. But the mission was always the same. Gather intelligence on Soviet nuclear programs. Joe's greatest success came in 1983. He'd managed to steal the plans for the Chernobyl nuclear facility, intelligence that allowed America to understand the true scope of Soviet nuclear capabilities. This information gave Reagan the upper hand in negotiations with Gorbachev. But like every deep-cover agent, Joe had an expiration date. In 1987, when his identity began to be compromised, the CIA pulled him out. Officially, John Walker died. Joseph Volkov quietly returned to America. When the Cold War ended, Joe was 50 years old. He'd lived under different identities for 25 years, had almost forgotten his real name. The CIA offered him a new identity, a clean background, and a quiet retirement. But Joe couldn't handle the silence. He was used to action, adrenaline, purpose. Normal retirement was driving him crazy. 2 years later, with CIA help, he found work as a janitor at the Pentagon. Officially, he was a reliable cleaning staff member with security clearance. Unofficially, he was still an asset. His first day at the Pentagon brought Joe home. Walking those corridors, his old instincts returned. He automatically recognized which offices were sensitive, which conversations to listen for, which documents were important. But over time, Joe discovered something different. This job gave him peace. The night shift, the silence, the routine. He'd found the stability that had been missing for years, and most importantly, he was still serving his country. In a different capacity, but still serving. 20 years passed. Joe became a fixture at the Pentagon. Same route every night, same timing, same efficiency. Generals, admirals, defense officials would walk past him without noticing his existence. Perfect invisibility. Joe loved this invisibility. For someone who'd lived in a high-stakes world for decades, constantly in danger, being invisible was a luxury. Nobody expected anything from him. Nobody questioned him. He just did his job and went home. But sometimes, old habits returned. One night, Joe was cleaning the defense secretary's office. On the desk was an open document, an intelligence report about Russia's new nuclear submarines. Joe reflexively scanned the document. The analysis was wrong. They were underestimating Russian submarine technology. Joe stopped. His old instincts were sounding alarms. This mistake could lead to strategic miscalculation. But he wasn't an agent anymore, just cleaning staff. Should he report it? To whom? How would he explain his knowledge? In the end, Joe quietly put the document back and continued his work. But an uncomfortable feeling remained. These moments happened frequently. Conversations overheard, documents glimpsed, connections made. Joe's trained mind automatically processed the information, but now he had no outlet. He couldn't do anything with it. Until that night. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was a young intelligence officer, new to the Pentagon, ambitious, eager to prove herself. She'd stayed late that night, working on Russian intelligence reports. Joe was making his usual rounds, cleaning offices. When he reached Chen's office, the young officer was frustrated. Russian documents scattered on her desk, translations incomplete. "Excuse me," Chen said to Joe. "You can come back later. I'm still working." Joe nodded and started to leave, but he stopped. One of the documents on the desk contained a code name he recognized from his old missions. Operation Red Star, a program Joe had personally infiltrated in 1985. Chen threw down the document in frustration. "This makes no sense," she muttered. "Why would they use Krasnaya Zvezda here?" Joe froze. Chen was trying to literally translate Red Star, but that was a code name, not a program name. Joe hesitated. Should he help? It was risky, but wrong analysis could threaten national security. "Miss," Joe said quietly, "Krasnaya Zvezda is not Red Star." Chen looked up, surprised. "What?" "It's a code name for underwater nuclear program, 1980s. Chen's eyes widened. "How do you—" Joe realized his mistake. Too late to back down. I read about it. Long time ago." Chen stood up carefully. "You read about Operation Red Star? Where?" Joe's mind raced. He needed a cover story, fast. History books, Cold War era. I like reading history." Chen looked suspicious. "What history books mention classified Soviet operation codes?" Joe was stuck. He'd blown his cover. Stupid mistake. Maybe I misunderstood." Chen moved closer. "Say something else in Russian." "I don't speak Russian. You just pronounced Krasnaya Zvezda perfectly. Native accent." Silence. Joe was trapped. Chen reached for her phone. "I think I need to call security." "Wait," Joe said. "Please wait." "Who are you?" Joe sighed deeply. 20 years of peaceful anonymity, gone in one moment. "I'm exactly who I appear to be, cleaning staff. But I wasn't always." Chen waited. "Long time ago, different life. I can't talk about it." "Try me." Joe looked around the office, calculating. Too much classified material here for casual conversation. Not here. Too many ears. "Where then?" "Cafeteria. Empty now. Safe." Chen hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. The Pentagon's night cafeteria was like a ghost town, nothing but the humming of vending machines. Joe and Chen sat across from each other at an empty table. "Who are you?" Chen asked again. Joe remained silent for a long time. Decades of training, silence to maintain. But it was too late now. "My name is Joseph Volkov, former CIA operative, retired 1987. Chen's jaw dropped. "CIA, deep cover operations, Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc, 25 years. "That's impossible. You're a janitor." "Now I am. Then I was someone else." Chen was trying to process. You were a spy?" "Intelligence officer, specializing in Soviet nuclear programs. And now you clean floors." "Yes." "Why?" Joe smiled sadly. "Because the war ended, and old soldiers need somewhere to go." Chen leaned forward. "Those documents upstairs, you actually know what they mean. Some of them, information I gathered personally 40 years ago." "Holy shit." Chen caught herself. "Sorry, sir." "Language is appropriate. This is a holy shit situation." They both smiled. "Mr. Volkov, why are you telling me this?" Because you're about to make an analysis error, and errors could cost lives. Chen's expression turned serious. What kind of error? Operation Red Star wasn't an underwater program. It was cover for land-based ICBM development, hidden in naval facilities to confuse Western intelligence. Chen stared. How could you possibly know that? Because I photographed the real documents, 1985 Murmansk Naval Base. You were there? For 6 months, posing as a marine engineer. Chen's mind was blown. Do you realize what you're telling me? Yes. And if current Russian intelligence is using that codename again, it means they're reviving the land-based missile program, not naval. Chen frantically scribbled notes. This changes everything. It changes the analysis, but you can't use this information. Why not? Because you can't explain the source. I don't exist officially. Chen was frustrated. So what do? Research publicly available sources, look for indirect evidence, build the case without mentioning me. That could take months. Better than exposing a classified asset, Chen realized. You're still an asset. Joe didn't confirm or deny. I'm cleaning staff. Who happens to read history books? Over the following weeks, Chen discreetly researched Joe's suggestions. Her analysis improved dramatically. Connections she never would have made, patterns she never would have seen. Gradually, Chen learned to work with Joe. Subtle questions, careful conversations, never obvious, never direct. Joe guided her analysis without leaving fingerprints. Other intelligence officers started noticing Chen's improved work. More accurate assessments, better predictions. Her reputation grew. But Chen knew the truth. Her success came from the wisdom of an invisible man who mopped floors while carrying 40 years of secrets. One night, Chen asked Joe directly, "Why do you help me?" Because intelligence matters, analysis saves lives, and I'm too old to gather new information, but not too old to share old wisdom. Don't you miss it? The real work? Joe considered. This is real work. Different, but real. I serve my country now by helping young analysts avoid old mistakes. Is that enough? At my age, contribution matters more than recognition. Months passed. Chen's career accelerated. Promotions, commendations, respect, all built on the foundation of Joe's quiet guidance. But success brought scrutiny. Chen's sudden improvement caught the attention of her supervisor, Colonel Martinez. Chen, your work has been exceptional lately. What changed? Chen was careful. Just studying harder, sir, learning from past analyses. Your insights into Russian operations are particularly sharp, almost like you have inside information. Dangerous territory. Just good research, sir. Martinez was suspicious. I'd like to review your sources. Chen's heart raced. Of course, sir. That night, Chen frantically contacted Joe through secure channels. They're getting suspicious. Martinez wants to review my sources. Joe was calm. Expected. Success always brings questions. What do I do? Tell the truth, partial truth. How? You've been consulting with a historical expert, Pentagon employee with extensive Cold War knowledge. You? No names necessary. Just say you found someone who lived through that era. Will that work? Depends how smart Martinez is. The next day, Chen met with Martinez. Sir, I've been consulting with someone on staff who has extensive historical knowledge of the Cold War era. Who? A maintenance staff member, been here 20 years, has remarkable memory for historical details. Martinez was puzzled. Maintenance? Yes, sir. Sometimes people have hidden depths. Martinez was skeptical, but couldn't argue with results. I want to meet this person. Chen's heart sank. Sir? If someone on our staff has valuable historical knowledge, I should know about it. That night, Chen warned Joe. He wants to meet you. Joe was unsurprised. Inevitable. What will you tell him? Same story. History enthusiast with good memory. He'll see through it. Maybe, but the alternative is exposure, which helps no one. Are you prepared for that? Joe smiled. I've been prepared for exposure for 40 years. Question is whether you're prepared for the consequences. What consequences? When they discover who I really am, your career could be damaged. Association with unauthorized asset. Chen considered this. Worth the risk. Your knowledge has prevented analysis errors that could have cost lives. You're sure? Absolutely. The next evening, Martinez arranged a meeting. Pentagon conference room, after hours. Joe arrived in his maintenance uniform, carrying a clipboard to maintain appearance. Martinez sized up Joe immediately. You're the maintenance worker with historical knowledge? Yes, sir. Joseph Volkov. Volkov, Russian name. Family emigrated decades ago. I grew up hearing stories. What kind of stories? Cold War era, Soviet military practices. My father worked in defense industry before emigration. Half-truth. The best kind of cover story. Martinez was skeptical. And you just happen to remember all these details? Good memory, always interested in history. Chen says you have insights into classified Soviet operations. Dangerous ground. Not classified, sir. Historical information that's been declassified over time. Such as, Joe was careful. Operation names that appeared in historical documents. Military structure details from memoirs of defectors. Martinez was testing. What can you tell me about Krasnaya Zvezda? Joe was ready for this. Code name that appeared in several declassified CIA documents from the 1980s. Referenced land-based missile development program disguised as naval operation. Technically true, the documents were declassified. Joe had just helped write them originally. Martinez seemed satisfied. How do you access these declassified documents? Internet archives, military history websites, a lot of information available if you know where to look. Martinez nodded slowly. Mr. Volkov, would you be interested in a more formal consulting arrangement? Joe hesitated. Sir? Pentagon has a historical research division. Your knowledge could be valuable. I prefer my current job, sir. Quiet, routine, good for my age. But this would be better use of your knowledge. With respect, sir, current arrangement works well. I help when needed, without formal responsibility. Martinez considered. Very well, but I may call on you again. Of course, sir. The meeting ended. Joe had maintained his cover, for now. But word spread. Other analysts started approaching Chen, asking about her historical consultant. Joe found himself busier, more consultations, more questions. The risk was increasing. More exposure, more chances for mistakes. One night, Joe told Chen, "This has to stop." Why? Too much attention, too many questions. Eventually, someone will dig deeper. Your cover is solid. No cover is perfect. And I'm getting old, more likely to make mistakes. Chen was sad. Your help has been invaluable. And it will continue, but differently. How? Joe pulled out a thick notebook. Everything I know, written down. Historical research with sources cited. You study it, internalize it, make it your own knowledge. That's incredibly generous. It's practical. Information should survive the source. Over the next month, Joe transferred decades of knowledge to written form. Historical context, operational details, strategic insights, all disguised as research from publicly available sources. Chen studied religiously. Within weeks, she had internalized most of Joe's knowledge base. I think I'm ready, Chen told Joe. For what? To work independently. Your knowledge is now my knowledge. Joe was proud. A good student learns to exceed the teacher. What will you do? Return to normal routine. Invisible maintenance worker. Safer for everyone. I'll miss our consultations. They'll continue, just less frequent, More careful, Joe returned to full invisibility. Occasional advice to Chen, but mostly back to quiet night shifts. But Joe's impact continued. Chen's success influenced other analysts. Better Russian intelligence assessment across the entire Pentagon. Strategic decisions based on more accurate information, all traced back to the wisdom of a man who cleaned floors. Years passed. Chen was promoted to major, then lieutenant colonel. She always credited her success to extensive historical research and good analytical training. Only she knew the truth. Joe turned 70, still working night shifts. His health was declining, but his spirit remained strong. He'd found purpose in quiet service. One night, Chen brought a special visitor. A young intelligence officer, new assignment, struggling with complex Russian analysis. "Mr. Volkov, could you share some of your historical insights with Lieutenant Morrison?" Joe looked at the young officer, reminded him of himself 40 years ago. Eager, intelligent, but lacking context. "Happy to help. What's the question?" And the cycle continued. Knowledge passed down, wisdom shared, service continued. Joe Volkov never received a medal, recognition, or thanks. His name appeared in no history books, no public records. But his knowledge prevented conflicts, informed strategies, saved lives. Sometimes the greatest service is invisible service. Sometimes the most important work is work nobody sees. During his final years at the Pentagon, Joe watched a new generation of analysts grow and succeed. Some, like Chen, rose to senior positions making critical decisions about national security. Others became specialists in Russian affairs, Middle Eastern politics, or emerging threats. What they all had in common was a foundation built on Joe's quiet guidance. Not direct training, that would have been too risky, but carefully shared wisdom disguised as historical anecdotes, casual observations, or something I read once. Joe's method was simple but effective. When he saw an analyst struggling with a particular problem, he'd find a way to share relevant historical context, a comment about how similar situations had played out during the Cold War, a mention of operational patterns that hadn't changed in decades, a suggestion about where to look for indirect confirmation of suspicious intelligence. To the analysts, Joe was just a friendly maintenance worker with an unusual interest in history. They had no idea they were receiving guidance from one of the CIA's most successful deep-cover operatives. The irony wasn't lost on Joe. During his active years, he'd operated in the shadows, stealing secrets and gathering intelligence that only a handful of people would ever see. Now, in retirement, he was having a broader impact than ever before. His knowledge was shaping American intelligence analysis at the highest levels. But the greatest satisfaction came from knowing he was helping prevent the kinds of intelligence failures that could lead to conflict or casualties. Every corrected assessment, every avoided miscalculation, every strategic decision based on accurate rather than flawed analysis. These were Joe's real victories. As his 70th birthday approached, Joe began to feel the weight of his years. The night shifts were harder on his aging body. His memory, while still sharp for historical details, sometimes faltered on more recent events. He knew his time at the Pentagon was drawing to a close. Chen, now a full colonel and head of Russian intelligence analysis, visited him one night during his rounds. "Joe, I have something to tell you," she said. "I'm being promoted to Deputy Director of Intelligence Analysis." Joe smiled. "Congratulations. Well deserved." "It's because of you. Everything I've accomplished traces back to what you taught me." "You did the work. I just shared some old stories." "We both know it was more than that." Chen paused. "I want to do something for you. Some kind of recognition." Joe shook his head firmly. "No recognition, no ceremonies, no paper trails. But your contribution. My contribution was supposed to be invisible. Let it stay that way. Chen understood. What will you do when you retire? Disappear. Again. It's what I do best. Will you be okay? Financially, I mean? Joe smiled. The agency takes care of its own, even the ones who don't officially exist. 6 months later, Joe quietly submitted his resignation. No fanfare, no goodbye party. He simply stopped showing up for his night shifts. His replacement was a younger man who cleaned efficiently, but had no historical knowledge to share. The analysts who had benefited from Joe's guidance noticed the difference, but they attributed it to losing a friendly ear rather than losing a source of wisdom. Chen tried to stay in touch, but Joe had truly disappeared. No forwarding address, no phone number. It was as if he'd never existed. But his legacy lived on. The analysts he'd guided continued to rise through the ranks. The knowledge he'd shared was passed down to new generations. The intelligence failures he'd helped prevent saved countless lives. Years later, when Chen was nearing retirement herself as Director of National Intelligence, she would sometimes walk the Pentagon corridors at night, remembering the quiet man who'd mopped these same floors while carrying the secrets of a lifetime. She never found out what happened to Joe Volkov, whether he was still alive, whether he'd found peace in true retirement, whether he'd simply faded away like so many other Cold War ghosts. But she knew his impact would endure. Every time an analyst made a connection others had missed, every time historical context illuminated a current threat, every time experience prevented a dangerous miscalculation, Joe's invisible hand was still at work. Joseph Volkov, spy, janitor, teacher, ghost, a man who served his country in war and peace, in shadow and in light, with weapons and with wisdom. He proved that heroes don't always carry guns or wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry mops and wear coveralls. Sometimes they change the world one conversation at a time, one piece of shared wisdom at a time, one prevented disaster at a time. His story was never told, his name never honored, his sacrifice never acknowledged. But his service never ended. It just changed form. In the end, Joe Volkov became what every great intelligence officer aspires to be: completely invisible, absolutely essential, and utterly unforgettable to those whose lives he touched. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that are never told. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose names are never known, and sometimes the most valuable service is the kind that leaves no trace except the lives it saves and the disasters it prevents. So tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who seemed ordinary but carried extraordinary secrets? Someone whose quiet wisdom changed your perspective? Share their story, because here at Everyday Legends, we believe that the most powerful legacies are often the most invisible ones. If this story touched you, subscribe and share. Because people like Joe Volkov are everywhere, serving in silence, protecting in shadow, making the world safer in ways we'll never know. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the most important work happens in the places where nobody's looking, done by people nobody notices, for reasons nobody understands until it's too late to say thank you.